So again, I'm Dr. Leonard. This is Pam Cureton. We're from the Center for Celiac Research and Treatment. And even more importantly, we are part of the CDGEMM study. So we wanted to have a chat to let you know sort of how things are going, let you know about some changes, and then answer any questions that we can in the next half hour or so. I will be trying to watch the group chat too, so if you have a question in there, we have a list of questions that Tori, our wonderful research coordinator, compiled, and then if anything comes up, I'll look in the group chat as well. So I'm really excited to say that I've been part of CDGEMM from the beginning, and it's been a full five years since we sort of started dreaming about this study. And I have really great news to report in that recruiting is going exceptionally well. We have a total of 340 infants involved in this study right now, and our initial goal was 500 infants. So we are, and everyone is participating, and so we're so thankful. So thank you very much for being part of this study. Right now, CDGEMM is in 3 countries. So we have 168 GEMMs in the United States. We have another 145 in Italy, and then we have 27 GEMMs in Spain. And so we're going to continue to recruit until we reach 500. And depending on how things go, we may recruit beyond that. Right now, I would say the average age of the GEMMs in our study is about between age 1 and 2. And so, again, right now, about 5 have developed celiac disease or another autoimmune disorder. We would have probably expected more than that at this time. And that may be because the GEMMs are still young, or it may be for other reasons that we have to sort of discover through our research. But for that reason, one of the things that we will be asking once your child is getting close to age 5, is we're going to be asking you to consent to participate for another 5 years of the research study. And that's so that we can continue to follow your children in order to learn about what turns celiac disease on in kids at risk.
Well, I think you've got some really interesting stuff coming up, though. You're starting to see some really good results and interesting things coming up.
Yeah, so we've started our first initial sort of pilot study, and what we are looking at is a total of about 30 infants that enrolled in the CDGEMM study, and we're looking at their microbiome, or the bacteria that live in their gut, from birth to 6 months of age. And we started there because we know that none of these kids have been introduced to solid foods yet. And so we really wanted to study sort of what environmental factors influence the developing microbiome in kids at risk for celiac disease. So particularly, we're looking at birthing delivery mode. We're looking at feeding type, so breast, bottle, or both. We're looking at whether they were exposed to antibiotics, either themselves or if the mother was exposed to antibiotics during birth. And then finally, we're also looking at their genetic type and whether that plays a role in sort of who is being established in their microbiome, which bacteria are living there. So we have been working on this for a while, and this analysis is also a way to sort of see, can we really study the microbiome at a really sort of high level, even when we're shipping poop across countries? And can we see differences in a small number of kids because we're using some methods that really have never been used before? And we're finding that we really can. So I'm working on the paper now. It's taking always a little bit longer than planned because there's so much data. But we've been seeing some really amazing stuff. So we can see that kids born vaginally have different species, have some significantly different species in their microbiome than kids born via C-section. We can see that depending on how they're fed, we see different species. And we can see that whether they're exposed to antibiotics or not, we can see different species. So the other thing that we are seeing that really hasn't been reported and that is super interesting is that we can see that depending on what genetic type, so whether the infant carries no compatibility to develop celiac disease, whether they have what we call standard risk, which is 1 or 2 copies of DQ2 or DQ8, or if they have the highest risk, which is the 2 copies of DQ2, that these infants all have sort of a different composition of their microbiome. And so this is telling us that probably genetics play a big role in sort of who's in your microbiome from birth, even despite so many other environmental factors. Right. And so this is something that is very interesting, and it's pretty incredible. We can see, for example, in some microbes that we think of as good, or that we know that these species are used in probiotics and they're thought of as good species, they are very high in kids with no genes for celiac disease. Then in the kids with the standard risk, they're medium, and the kids with the highest risk, they're low, or not there. So this first paper is saying, can we see differences? And we can, and that's great. But then once this is complete, we have to move on to the real step, which is to say, okay, we see differences. Now we need to understand how that can be linked to actually developing celiac disease.
It doesn't make a difference in who develops it and who doesn't.
Right.
And can we really look at that to prevent celiac disease down
Exactly.
the road? Is that the key? So that's fascinating stuff.
Exactly. So we can see differences, and now we have to go to the next step. So with these 5 kids that have developed celiac disease so far, that's exactly what we're going to do. So we're working through sort of the methods with these other children, so that then the next sort of paper will start to look at, okay, what species are different, what metabolites are different, what is the function of the microbiome, and is that different? And then we're going to dive even deeper and say, okay, how is this affecting sort of the immune system? How is this affecting certain genes? So I think that we're all very excited to say we're really, really hopeful that we are in a great position to make some really amazing
big discoveries that affect everyone. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so we're very excited, and that's the reason that, one, we're asking if you are willing to, if you'll sign on for another 5 years, so we can continue to search for answers to predict and prevent celiac disease. The details of that will be that we'll ask for blood and stool every year and questions yearly, and we'll continue to monitor. The other thing that we are going to ask, because of what we're finding and because we are so close to having a better understanding of really what's going on at the microbiome level, is that we're going to ask for a little more blood. And I wanted to show you sort of what we're asking for now, and then what we are going to ask for at each time point. But the reason that we're asking for more blood is because, again, we are finding differences in the microbiome and in the metabolites, or the chemicals that the bacteria in the gut produce. And so now what we need to do to understand what turns celiac disease on is we need to understand what genes in the body are ultimately turned on. So what we think is that there's a change in the microbiome that leads to certain chemicals being produced, which ultimately leads to certain pathways being turned on and certain genes being turned on or off, that allows for the development of celiac disease.
So answering the question why someone will develop celiac disease when they're 2 years old or 92 years old. So what happens to some, why are they early? Why are they late? What's going on? What changes?
Yeah.
What flips the trigger?
Right. So we think if we can understand the differences that are occurring early on and then figure out what genes actually being flipped, that this could explain, why someone is developing it, like you said, at age 2 or age 22. And it's probably not going to be, this combination of environmental factors for everyone turns the gene on, but maybe in these kids that have developed celiac disease so far, we can understand that it's the same sort of genes that are turned on and off, maybe because of different factors. And so the one thing that we don't have is a certain is blood at each time point that we can test in a certain way for these genes. So we are going to ask as well for a little bit more blood at each time sample so that we can correlate what we're seeing in the stool and the chemicals, and then with the genes that may be turned on and off, to see if, again, we can figure out how to prevent celiac disease.
So it's not a lot more that you're asking for.
So we decided to show sort of the blood. I don't know if this will work, but I'm going to pour in. So these are the tubes that we ask for at 12 months. This is a cup. So what we ask for, and I'm going to pour it in. Okay. So for serum, this is what we take every time. We put a little line because that's the line we put there. And then you can see it doesn't even fill the bottom of the cup. Whoa. Okay. And then, can you hold this?
I would
come
love
on,
to hold that.
yourself
To be a little
here.
assistant.
Let's do this. Okay. And so this is for the genetics. So this is just at 12 months. That's how much we have. Higher. Come on. Oh. So the people can see it.
There we go. See, okay. It's got the dark.
But see, if you go that way, no. But basically, it doesn't even cover the bottom of the cup. So the blood is the most difficult because, especially as the child gets older, they do not want their blood taken. But this is really important for us to determine what is happening, what turns celiac disease on. So you can see this is what we ask for usually. Okay, I'm going to show you what we are going to send. The tubes that we're going to send would look like this from now on instead of just this at all the other time points. What's this? Okay. Okay. Time out. So the tubes that we are going to send are going to look like this. I'm substituting one in because one's pretty expensive and I'm not going to dump out the stuff that's in it because it's kind of important. And if Alessio Pisano watches this, so
come out of her paycheck.
That's very expensive. So some of these tubes are very expensive, and that's to preserve the exact cells we need to make these discoveries.
All right.
So from now on, instead of this tiny amount, that is very small and is well within the limit that one could take from a child, we will still be getting the serum. Okay, if you could hold it a little higher. I mean,
there we go.
Come on. Oh, that's gone. Okay, and that's why we're not using the expensive stuff. Okay, and then this would be the expensive one, is just a tiny bit more. And then this one, honestly, you are not going to be Vanna. So, okay. And then this one is going to be one where we actually separate certain immune cells and we can tell what genes are turned on and off. So this was before.
And so just that additional amount.
There's this one too, but it's just a tiny amount that you only can fill it a little bit because it's mostly filled with this RNA later saver stuff so that we can preserve the genes. So it's not too much more, but it's still a very small amount, but we're asking this. We have specific plans for it, and
this is only after age 5 or for all kids?
So this is going to be at all time points. We're going to send
from now. So starting from now on, all time points.
We're going to send it and try.
For those already in the study, it would be.
Starting whenever their next blood draws, they should expect to see these new ones. Of course, the serum is the most important, but for research discoveries, this will give us a way to look at what genes are turned on, and then also specifically specific immune cells. So it's going to be a lot more work in our lab too, because when we get this back now, and we have to process them in a certain way to isolate the immune cells because they only stay good for 24 hours. So we do always need the blood sent next day, but especially because these immune cells only will live until we put them in special.
So they'll get 3 tubes now.
So they'll get 3 tubes now.
So 3 tubes
instead of the one serum tube.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So,
but just a tiny bit more.
And just a tiny bit more. And I'm happy to answer questions about that further. But I think the real exciting thing is, as soon as this paper is able to come out, or we'll send it to you, and as soon as we can get you more results, we will. Right now, we are supposed to keep some of it a little bit of a secret because it is new and it's not been shown before. But we are working on it. We want to get this out as fast as possible because we want to show you what you guys have been able to do. And it's pretty amazing.
That's amazing. That is amazing.
It's really exciting.
Right. So you can tell your kids as they grow up that they were part of this discovery.
Yes.
That all that screaming and crying was really for something that was okay.
And they won't remember that, but they will remember this sort of thing. So thanks for bringing that up, Pam. Anyway, all right. So those are sort of the study changes. Now let's go on to, we have some questions that people wrote in. So one of them was asking about, why are we only following children till age 5 and what if they develop it later? So we are extending it until age 10. If, again, you'll be asked, and if you agree, please join and stay in the study till age 10. But this is also sort of in terms of funding cycles and grants. We have a grant for the first 5 years, and now we have to try and get more money from the government so we can continue to study what we're studying. But because recruitment is going so well and because we are really making some novel findings, I'm very hopeful that this will continue. Okay. So should I keep going here, or do you want to answer any of the gluten introduction questions?
So we have a few questions from us. Again, if you have other questions regarding any of this, type them in. Let us know. We'll try and get to those. So, one really important thing that came from all this study was looking at when do you introduce gluten to babies? Should you wait a year? Should you introduce it right away? How much? And it was through research like this that we actually can make these recommendations, that we can say that we still recommend what the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends, in that they should be completely breastfed or formula fed up to age 6 months, and then the introduction of solids. And again, we don't see any advantage to holding off the introduction of gluten. So you can introduce, as most babies start out with cereals, so either rice cereals or those types of things, but they can also introduce gluten-containing foods as they would for the normal population or kids that we don't worry about with celiac genes. So the introduction of gluten can come anytime after 6 months when you start putting it in the diet. And
some will start even as early as 4 months. Before 3 months has been shown to be associated with an increased risk of celiac disease. So certainly gluten-containing foods before 3 months for any child is too early. But any time around 6 months would be fine. And the research that you mentioned, again, looked at, it was a randomized trial of kids that got gluten at 6 months and other kids that didn't have it until 12 months. And same number developed celiac disease by age 3. So there was no benefit in holding off on
the gluten introduction.
Yeah. So there was another question too about sort of how much gluten should be consumed before the blood test in order to get an accurate reading of, does my child, are they developing celiac disease? Technically, someone needs to have about 1 serving of gluten a day. That could be a handful of crackers or cookies or 1 or 2 slices of bread. But they typically need 1 serving of gluten daily. And we know it takes at least 28 days for the TTG, the blood test for celiac disease, to rise after someone's eating gluten. So it would have to be consistently. You can't give them gluten the week before and
I think that is a confusing thing that we have a lot in clinic when people ask about the TTGs. I think the TTG is very different from, let's say, blood sugar. So if you're diabetic and you eat a piece of cake, we're going to know right away because your blood sugar is going to rise immediately. It's not like that with the TTG. So as Dr. Leonard said, it takes a while for that to rise. So if you eat something, it's not going to go up immediately. So, and I think parents worry about this when their child gets an accidental exposure to it.
Yeah.
So they're at a party and they grab the pretzel that isn't gluten-free and they eat that. That does not set them back to square one. So their TTG isn't going to rise to over 100 immediately.
If they won't rise at all.
That's true. So again, and they may have symptoms. So they may suffer some symptoms, some GI distress or a headache or something, some symptoms such. but it's not going to cause, again, and some people think that it's going to cause total villus atrophy as well. So they're afraid that if they have this little exposure, that it's going to do major damage to the intestinal lining. So the take-home message is that, yes, there's going to be a high likelihood that occasionally there's going to be accidents. We live in a world of wheat and we live with humans, and that's just a bad combination. So
especially for me.
Especially if you're gluten-free. So I don't want you to get upset. I don't want you to panic or get too concerned that you have, done total destruction of the villi. It's going to happen. We say use it as a teachable moment. Talk to your child about, oh, we need to be a little bit more careful. Let's ask mommy before you eat something. These things happen. So again, the TTG is not a quick acting, and it's not going to cause total villus atrophy right away. So, so just to kind of allay your fears a little bit.
So the test, to be accurate, it has to be consistent gluten ingestion over more than a month.
Exactly.
And yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So let's see. What else is on this list? Okay.
So we, questions too for kids comes in about, should the whole household be gluten-free? My only concern with the whole household going gluten-free is, as you all know, it is quite expensive. So having multiple people eating $6 a loaf bread just gets to be a huge economic burden on the whole family. So if there's other people in the household, that's one thing that I just, would put out there, that you don't have to go gluten-free. Again, children need to learn that we are living in a world of wheat. They are going to be exposed to this, and when they should be careful about what they're eating. Now, if they're toddlers, I do understand, especially for little ones, for toddlers, and they want to eat what you're eating. They want to eat what's on your plate. They want to feed you. So in some cases, that's probably going to make life easier when you have them very small. But the older they get, it's just too expensive. The food is readily available. It tastes good. I think we can, find good tasting gluten-free food, so the whole family shouldn't suffer from that point. But you really want to save that money for their college education, because that's just too expensive to feed other teenagers $6 loaf of bread.
Yeah.
You need to be careful. And we were talking about cross-contact.
Yeah, and this comes into sort of how careful do we need to be out in the world for cross-contamination, which is a great question, because people are now saying, people with celiac disease are gluten-free, but they're not completely without gluten. But I think one mistake is one thing, but I always think of it as I have to do everything in my power to not get exposed to gluten, because I know that because I go out to eat or I go other places that I'm going to be exposed to minute amounts, and I'm hopeful that that will be sort of below the threshold over time.
We know that most people with celiac disease can tolerate 10 milligrams worth of gluten exposure, about 1/8 of a teaspoon of flour. So that's your kind of your protective, what you're talking about. That's the amount that we consider for most people safe. So you want to protect that. So you want to do the things that are under your control, like getting a separate toaster. That's why we ask for a separate toaster or toaster oven, to use squeezable condiments instead of double dipping with a knife, and those little things at home. So make the gluten-free sandwich first, then make the gluten-containing sandwiches second. Wipe off the counters. Make sure pots and pans are clean. You don't need all new pots and pans. Good washing in between. Utensils, as long as they're washed thoroughly and cleaned, you don't have to have a whole different set. So just cleanliness. Remember, we're talking about food particles. We're not talking about bacteria like you would worry about chicken and salmonella, where you can't see it. So cleaning off the counter is sufficient. You don't have to sanitize it. It's not a bacteria that we're trying to kill. So make the gluten-free first, then follow it with gluten-containing. Keep spoons separate. So do a few things to keep it separate, but you want to protect. So when you do go out, and that they're not necessarily 100% in the kitchen, unless it's a completely gluten-free restaurant, which we don't have that many of, you may get a little bit more exposed.
Okay. So somebody asked about like a crock pot. So if you clean a crock pot, that's fine. You don't need a separate crock pot.
No.
And if you're traveling and using an Airbnb kitchen, again, I would wipe down the counters.
As long as everything is cleaned, and you want that cleaned anyway.
Yeah.
Now the
like,
toaster issue would be, and you may want to look for toaster bags. Google toaster bags. So when you're going on vacation, you don't have to lug a toaster with you, but you can use a toaster bag, put your bread, your waffles in that, then set that in the toaster.
Okay, but what about pots and pans at an Airbnb?
But as long as you wash them out,
wash them
good soap and water and clean them out, you're fine.
Colander at an Airbnb.
So again, as long as you have washed it thoroughly, run it through the dishwasher, again, you're going to be fine. So cleaning, and again, I don't want people to be paranoid or fearful. I don't want them to go over the top. I want you to be careful and thoughtful, making sure the surface is clean, making sure the utensils are clean. But you certainly, again, you don't need to buy all new, take new pots and pans with you everywhere you go.
Okay, great. All right, should we talk about breastfeeding before I go back onto sort of genetic testing?
So there is a question about if mom is not celiac, if mom's taking in gluten. Wait.
Yeah, so there's two things. So about babies being, yeah, you read that while I answer part two. Someone's prepared.
Someone is like pointing at questions that I can't read because I don't have my glasses on.
Oh, so, that's true.
Okay, there we go.
Twofer. Okay, well, one question was basically, do you think if an infant is breastfeeding and the infant has had some gluten-containing food, could it be passed to the mother? And so that would be no. There's no chance that that could happen. In the other direction, there's not too much research, but Pam could possibly address about gluten being transferred.
There is minimal amount in that's going to be transferred, but again, it's if we're going back to what we consider gluten-free, it's well less than the 20 parts per million that we consider safe. So it's a minute amount, and we don't recommend that mothers have to go gluten-free in order to, again, prevent the children from getting gluten in their breast milk.
Okay. So I'm going to go on to some of the other questions related to research, genetic testing, elevated TTGs, and what's new in the drug pipeline for celiac disease, which is also super exciting. Sorry. So for genetic testing, there's a question about what other autoimmune conditions are associated with carrying DQ2 in addition to having celiac disease. So I would say that we do think that, and we know that all sort of autoimmune diseases are pretty close together on the same chromosome. Having HLA-DQ2 and 8 predispose you to other autoimmune diseases, namely thyroid disease, type 1 diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, all of these things. So one of the things that we are studying in other research projects are sort of what genes might be related to developing other autoimmune diseases, and if we can predict who will develop more than one. But we don't have the answers right now, but we know that carrying DQ2 and or DQ8 predispose you to developing other autoimmune conditions. Mm-hmm. We know that in this research study that children will develop things other than celiac disease, and we will study that as well. So if kids develop type 1 diabetes, we will try and see if we can also understand, if it's a similar process that happens in the microbiome and the chemicals that the microbiome produces, or if it's different. So that's one of the things that we'll be looking at, because we know this cohort is at higher risk to develop autoimmune disease. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm going to then jump over to sort of celiac disease testing and persistent, all these questions about TTGs. So there's a lot of confusion about what happens if TTG doesn't come down, even when you're trying everything. And so, again, we have probably 20 ongoing studies here at the Center for Celiac Research and Treatment. And while CDGEMM is our heart, well, I can speak for myself.
I was going to say that's your
my heart and soul. I'm involved in
There's
at least
more going
15 others, but CDGEMM is number one in my book. I can say that, and it's obvious. Okay. But We are also studying TTG and persistent enteropathy and whether children heal. So we know that 40% of adults with celiac disease don't have healing in their gut mucosa between 2 and 5 years, despite being on a strict gluten-free diet. And people have always said, let people, and guidelines from all sorts of national foundations say, follow the TTG until it normalizes, and that's when you know that you have healing and you're on a strict gluten-free diet. But it's not true, I would say. And
it's not always the case.
It's not always.
We can't count on that like we thought we could.
Yeah. So the tests were really validated to diagnose celiac disease, but not to confirm that there's mucosal recovery or that you're on a strict gluten-free diet. It eventually goes down in most people, but it's not always indicative of really what's going on in the gut. So we have studies here that we're trying to identify other biomarkers to know when someone has had mucosal healing. So what I would say is, if there is an elevated TTG and you are doing your best, the first thing to do is always to speak with a knowledgeable dietitian who can really comb through every part of the diet and every
something you might be missing or ingredient you might be missing.
Ingredient, yeah. So we've had recently, we always have Milky Ways, Lindt chocolates.
Lindt chocolate.
There was.
So Twizzlers, there's, again, maybe you're, thinking that these things are gluten-free. Like some people will drink reduced gluten beer or
omission beer.
Omission beer, which we don't believe to be safe.
There's more and more malt beverages on the market that say gluten-free that aren't. So the first thing to do is to really comb through everything with the dietitian.
And eating out, like I said, eating out is
asking the right questions.
Right. How are you asking questions, and are you careful about what they're serving and that type of thing? So sometimes eating out can be a real, really easy way to get contaminated.
Yeah. And then you want to look into any prescription and over-the-counter medications as well, because they could contain gluten, and they don't have to say so. So we do recommend talking to manufacturers of different medications to make sure that it's gluten-free. But then we would say, just because the TTG is elevated, it does not necessarily mean that there is not healing taking place.
Right.
So we now have new tests that we are studying. One is glutenostics or gluten detective test. So you can measure urine or stool for gluten. And so that's something that we're doing in a research study to see if we can identify people that have persistent problems in their gut because of celiac disease, and if we can identify that they are getting some minute amount of gluten into their diet.
And sometimes, again, we have found, and I know people, and for right reasons, don't always want that second endoscopy. And we do for adults. It was a reason for that, to see you may have an elevated number, but you may have a completely healed intestinal lining, in which case your number is your number. So there's no reason to keep pursuing it to get it from a 4 to a 3. Or it's 6 and you want to get it down. So really what we're looking for is intestinal healing, not just the number.
Yeah.
So again, just as people can have a normal TTG and still have problems without healing, they can also have an elevated TTG but have a completely healthy gut, no symptoms, etc. So after, again, really scrutinizing the diet, then you really need a good, knowledgeable gastroenterologist to sit down and talk to as well. And follow up. And the follow-up care is so important to make sure that you really are, it's a problem. It may not be a problem. That number may be your number.
Yeah. So I would say every lab is different too. So if you go from one lab to another, the numbers might be different. Each lab sets their own cutoff. So there is probably some minor fluctuations everywhere, but the most important thing is that there's mucosal healing. And the sort of data is still evolving there for kids, but it's certainly there for adults already.
Adults, yeah. And it's unfortunate, but that second endoscopy may be really the answer.
Yeah, until we find some other methods that are less invasive, which we're working on.
So stay tuned.
Okay, and on that note, to sort of wrap it up, I wanted to talk about other research because people have asked sort of what is the real scoop about these upcoming medications. So I feel like every time I get a Google alert, it's like there's a new medication for celiac disease and it's coming immediately.
Right.
But there is more, I would say there's more interest in developing a drug for celiac disease than ever before. That is true.
That's true.
There is one medication right now that is that is going to start stage 3, phase 3. Why am I calling it stage? Phase 3. Mm-hmm. It hasn't started phase 3 yet. But that still then means the furthest one along is it has to be a couple of years away. If it hasn't started yet, I mean, 3.
And that just means that that
years.
part of that study needs lots of people, a lot of testing. So they've kind of done smaller testing to see the efficacy of it. Now they need large participation. So again, they need lots of people to participate so they can then look at the data to see, yes, it's
actually effective. We know it's safe for people to take, but is it truly effective?
So that involves a lot of centers, a lot of research, so a lot of money. So that stage is a big one.
Yeah. So, and that one is too, it's not looking to allow people to eat a whole slice of pizza. It is just, okay, we'll take whatever we can get to start. So I'm going to take the just out. It is going to prevent against the minute amount of cross-contamination. I see it as people would use it when they travel or when they're
like we talked
eating
about
at a friend's house or something.
At the restaurants. And it could be possible. It would be exciting that you could have French fries and you didn't have to worry if it was in a dedicated fryer or not.
Yeah.
So if it's that type of contamination. So yes, it's not going to a regular pizzeria and having a big slice of pizza.
Yeah, but maybe you could go to like a bar. I mean, it's summer, getting invited to barbecues, and I'm like, that's terrifying.
Right.
Because
so you don't. It would prevent that cross contact.
Yeah.
Those minute amounts from bothering you.
So maybe, I don't know. I think we could discuss again in 2 years and see where they're at, but I wouldn't even want to give a timeline.
Questions about healing too. I think it's also looking at for people who can't get their TTGs down and they are on a strict gluten-free diet and they're following it.
And they have mucosal atrophy.
And so it may help with that healing. So that's another hopeful, we have our special diet that we treat people with that's very difficult to follow and lengthy and, it's usually successful, but it's hard to do. So if we could use a medication like that to help with healing, that would be another benefit from this medication.
Yeah. So that one I would say is the furthest along, and we can chat about it again in 2 years and have a better understanding of when it's coming out. But there's a ton of interest right now from pharmaceutical companies. We're running a clinical trial here, and there are several others that have some interest. Right now, it's still sort of the data gathering phase, so they need people with celiac disease to eat gluten. And then really get a lot of information about what's changing in the body so that we can see if the drugs will be effective to fight against symptoms and other things. So that is really difficult. What I hope is that we can sort of like really try to get all the people that have sort of asymptomatic celiac disease. Can you participate in these gluten challenge ones? And then we'll get all the people with real bad symptoms to try the drugs first. And then hopefully they won't get any of their symptoms because the drugs will be effective. So if we all come together and volunteer for the ones that we can, then we should have drugs on the market sooner. But it is going to take everybody sort of getting together. And we've had great responses from people who are willing to try to eat gluten, and they're doing well. The study's going on. So again, we're gonna have more information soon, but I couldn't even say exactly when, but I could give an update.
It's definitely in the pipeline.
Yeah. So for now, somebody did ask, what do you do if you are exposed to gluten and you get soup and you don't feel well and you get sick? So what we say is you just have to unfortunately treat the symptoms. So if it's reflux, you take Zantac. If it's constipation, you take Miralax. If it's diarrhea, you take other things. You get stuff. And you go from there.
There you go.
Speaking of diarrhea, sorry, I'm playing with my stress.
A
My
emoji,
stress
poop emoji. There is
Not
nothing on the
stress.
market, so please know there's nothing on the market. The glutenese or the
Gluten, yeah.
enzyme tablets that are advertised, please don't use those as thinking that then you can, recover or you can eat gluten. Those are supplements. So as a supplement, they don't have to follow the stringent rules that a medication that we're talking about has to follow with the FDA. So they're marketing that under a supplement. So it is not effective. It is not for people with celiac disease or gluten sensitivity. So please don't be fooled by them and use that, eat gluten and then use those. Those are not effective.
Okay. So we'll wrap it up there by saying thank you so much for participating in this study. We are learning amazing things already. And as soon as we can share all the details with you, we will. But we are sort of finding so much that we do want to try and continue this for an additional 5 years. And we do need to get a little bit more information from the blood so that we can really try and identify sort of what is being turned on in terms of leading to ultimately the development of celiac disease. And we think if we can get this information, then we have a great chance at learning how to prevent it. So again, first step is finding some differences depending on, environmental exposure in these kids, and we found that. So now, very shortly, we should be getting that out into the world and sharing it with all you. And then the next step is really figuring out what the differences are in kids that have developed celiac disease and those who haven't. So it's a super exciting time.
Very exciting.
And we thank you so much for your participation. And we will do our best.
Okay. Have a good night.
Okay. Bye-bye.